Get back!
The cabin door was already open when I got there. Not wide open, just a thin black gap like the place was holding its breath. The key was still under the mat, exactly where the owner promised. So either the last renter left it like this, or something out here didn't need a key. I drove up because my head wouldn't shut up. Work had been loud for months, my phone louder, and I wanted 4 days with no signal and no people. A porch, a fire, snow on the ridge, quiet. The listing was cheap. $50 a night, remote. No cell service, no Wi-Fi. 3 hours from the city, then gravel that climbed until the pines got tight and the air got thin. The last stretch was switchbacks and drop-offs. My truck crawling at 15 miles per hour. Dust hanging behind me like smoke. When I rolled into the clearing, it looked like the photos. Small cabin, weathered boards, tin roof, 2 mismatched chairs on the porch, forest on 3 sides, and an open view on the fourth where you could see the ridgeline like a jagged blade. I sat in the truck for a second, hands on the wheel, letting the quiet soak in. No cars, no voices, not even wind, just that thick mountain stillness. It felt good, like I'd made the right call. Then I noticed the steps, dark streaks across the wood, like wet mud dragged up and wiped off by something heavy. And on the doorframe, near the latch, 4 shallow gouges close together, not deep enough to be fresh splintered, not old enough to be weathered smooth, like something had tested the door and gotten bored. Probably a bear, I said out loud, because silence makes you invent reasons. Bears scratch. Bears push doors if they smell food. Logical. I hauled my bags onto the porch and stepped towards the gap. The boards creaked under my boots. Cold air leaked from inside, and that smell hit me. Damp wood, cold ash, and wet animal, the kind of sour musk that clings to a dog after days in the rain. I pushed the door open and called, "Hello." My voice died in the corners. No answer. One main room. Tiny kitchen, couch, table, fireplace with gray ash like someone had used it recently. Bedroom and bathroom off to the side. Nothing moved. No TV glow, no fridge hum. Just my breathing and the soft ticking of cooling metal. Still, I locked the door the second my bags were inside. Deadbolt, then the little hook latch above it. Checked every window twice. They all latched, but the glass looked thin in the late light, like it would give up if something decided it wanted in. I tried to settle in anyway, put food in the fridge, stacked firewood by the hearth, made a sandwich, and ate it standing up because sitting felt too relaxed for a place that greeted me with an open door. By late afternoon, the sun was bright and the view was ridiculous. I walked the edge of the clearing, just a few hundred feet, getting my bearings. That's when I realized what was wrong. There were no birds, not one call, not one flutter, no squirrels, no little rustle in the brush, just trees standing still like they were listening. I stopped and held my breath, waiting for the forest to go back to normal. It didn't. I went back inside before the light started dropping, built a fire, watched it take, felt the heat creep into the room, cooked a cheap steak on the 2-burner stove and ate it with my boots still on. Outside, the sky turned purple, then black, and the tree line became a solid wall. At 9:12, I heard the first sound that didn't belong. One heavy thud on the porch. Not a branch. Not the cabin settling. Heavy. Close. Like a big hand set down on the boards and lifted away. I froze with my plate in my lap. The fire popped once, loud in the room. I waited for another thud, for footsteps, for laughter, anything human. Nothing. Ice sliding off the roof, I whispered. Tin roof. Temperature drop. Logical again. I nodded like I'd convinced myself. Then the smell came back, stronger this time, seeping through the cracks around the door. Wet animal and something sharp underneath, like fresh earth turned over with a shovel. That was the moment I stopped pretending this was just a peaceful getaway. I didn't have a gun. I had a phone. So I turned the camera on, set it on the table facing the door, and sat there in the firelight listening to the porch boards settle, waiting to hear if the silence was going to breathe again. If you want to know what that camera picked up before the night was over, like, subscribe and drop a comment, bear, or something else. At some point, I must have fallen asleep in my clothes, because the first thing I felt was the fire dying and the room turning sharp with cold. My phone was still on the table, camera facing the door, battery blinking red. Outside, dawn was a thin wash of blue. For a second, I hated myself for being scared of shadows. Then, I opened the door. The porch boards were dusted with a light powder of snow that hadn't been there the night before, clean, unbroken, except for one smear that ran from the steps to the door like something heavy had come right up to the threshold. On the doormat, a little mound of fallen snow had formed under the porch roof. Pressed into it were prints, not paws, not hooves, five-toed impressions, deep enough to compress the snow into ice. The heel was broad and blunt, the toes long and slightly splayed, like a human footprint scaled up by something that didn't move like a man. I crouched and held my hand over it. My palm didn't cover the width. Bear, I said again, because the word was a shield. Bare hind foot. Except bears don't leave clean toe impressions. Bears don't stand at your door and wait. And bears don't scrape the doorframe in four neat lines like they're checking for weakness. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, filming without thinking. The air slapped my lungs. The forest sat around the clearing, silent. I followed the tracks off the porch. They sank deeper where the snow was thin, then vanished at the edge of the clearing where dead leaves and pine needles took over. I moved slow, scanning for anything that would make this normal. Instead, I found the trees. 30 feet into the tree line, a spruce trunk had fresh gouges high up, 7 feet, maybe more. Long vertical rips, deep, with pale wood still wet beneath the bark. Something tall had leaned into it with force. The smell hit me again, wet animal and cold dirt, stronger here, threaded with something metallic that made my stomach tighten. I backed away to the porch, eyes on the dark between the trees, and only when my boots hit the boards did I realize my hands were shaking. Inside, I played the video from the night. At first, it was nothing: firelight, the door, me sitting too still. I fast forwarded, thumbs sliding, eyes flicking between the battery icon and the door on screen. Then, at 2:17 a.m., the audio changed. A low sound bled into the room, too deep to be wind, too steady to be the cabin settling. It wasn't a growl, it was breathing. Slow, controlled, like whatever was outside had all the time in the world. The shadows at the bottom of the door shifted, like something blocked the porch. Then the latch, my latch, gave a tiny twitch. Not opening. Testing. Just enough to make the metal click. I paused the video and sat there listening to the real cabin around me. The smart move was obvious. Leave. Get back to the truck, drive down before the road iced. Tell myself it was a bear and I overreacted. I packed anyway, fast and clumsy. Food shoved back into bags. Sleeping bag rolled wrong. Every zipper sounded like a signal. When I stepped onto the porch with my duffel, the print had started to soften in the early sun, but the depth was still there, stubborn, like a bruise. I turned toward the truck, and that's when I saw the second set of marks. Not in the snow. On the side of my truck, dragged through the dust along the driver door, 4 lines, parallel, clean, starting near the handle and running back toward the bed. Whoever did it had been close enough to touch the handle, close enough to try it. And the worst part was the height. Those marks sat where a man's hand would be, if that hand was the size of a dinner plate. I set the duffel down and stared at the driver handle. The dust around it was smudged, like fingers had tested the metal. The lock had a clean ring where something had rubbed it, very patient. A crunch sounded behind me. I whipped around, phone up. Nothing on the porch. Nothing in the clearing, just the tree line and that dead quiet, like the whole forest was holding its breath. In daylight, the doorframe gouges looked worse. 4 lines, evenly spaced, too straight to be random clawing. Under them, jammed into the soft pine near the latch, were a few dark hairs, coarse, wiry, caught like they'd been combed off by pressure. I stepped inside, locked up again, and listened. From somewhere beyond the trees came one dull thump, like something heavy shifting its weight in snow. Then nothing. I didn't leave that morning. I told myself I would, but I kept finding reasons to wait. The road might be slick, the sun would melt the ice. I should eat first. Truth was, the idea of stepping into that driver's seat with my back to the tree line made my skin crawl, so I did what people do when they're trying not to panic. I made rules: daylight only, never go farther than I can sprint back, keep the phone recording. Not because it would save me, because if something happened, I wanted proof I wasn't crazy. I put on my thickest jacket, stuffed a headlamp in the pocket, and grabbed the only weapon I had, an old splitting maul leaning by the woodpile. The handle was worn smooth, heavy enough to be comforting, heavy enough to be slow. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, maul in one hand, phone in the other. The air was bright and cold, the kind that makes every sound feel sharp. Except there were still no sounds. No bird calls, no distant woodpecker, no squirrels in branches. just my boots crunching and my breathing inside my hood. At the edge of the trees, the snow was thinner, patched with needles. I found the tracks again where they cut into a soft pocket of powder between roots. Same shape, same deep heel, 5 toes. One print overlapped another like it had paced back and forth, waiting. I followed them, slow, stepping exactly where I had stepped before so I wasn't adding my own mess to the story. 10 feet in, 20. The light changed under the canopy, turning everything blue-gray. The smell came back, stronger, wet animal and turned earth, like something had been digging. Then I saw it. A section of ground torn up near a fallen log, snow scraped away to bare soil. Not the scattered clawing of a bear. This was a wide, deliberate scoop, like someone had cleared a space on purpose, and pressed into the exposed dirt were handprints. Actual handprints. I stared for a long second, waiting for my brain to correct it. Bears don't leave hands. Humans don't leave hands that big. But there they were, long finger grooves, a wide palm, the impression so deep you could see where the fingertips had pushed into the ground with weight. My throat went dry. I filmed it, whispered, "What the hell?" and pulled my hand away as if the dirt itself might grab me back. Something snapped to my left. Not a branch falling, a twig, close, like a foot shifted. I froze so hard my shoulders ached. The forest stayed still. I turned my head slowly, scanning between trunks, forcing myself not to do the stupid thing and spin in a circle. Nothing. But the silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful. It was attentive. I backed up a step and my boot hit something that wasn't snow. I looked down. A strip of fabric, dark and damp, snagged on a thorn bush. Not old, not sun-bleached, like it had been ripped recently. I lifted it with the maul handle and saw a stitched seam, the kind you'd find on a jacket sleeve. My stomach dropped. The listing said the cabin hadn't been rented in weeks. I backed toward the clearing, eyes forward, phone held up. I didn't run yet. Running is what prey does, and I hated that my mind was already assigning roles. That's when I noticed the trees again. More gouges, higher up than any bear could reach without standing. Deep, vertical rakes, spaced like fingers. Some were fresh enough that sap still glistened at the edges. And on one trunk, right at my eye level, there were marks that looked like symbols. Not letters, not words. Just repeated lines and curves carved into bark as if something had dragged a sharp point in a pattern. 3 slashes, a hook, then 2 more slashes. It didn't feel like random scratching, it felt like a sign. I forced myself to keep moving until I broke out into the bright open of the clearing. The cabin didn't look safe anymore. It looked small. I got to the porch and realized my hands were trembling so hard the phone video was a blur. I set them all down, kept the camera rolling, and scanned the tree line like a man expecting it to move. Something did. A shape, tall, dark, slid between 2 trees at the far edge, just for a second. Too quick to focus on. Too big to be a deer. The movement wasn't the bounding hop of an animal. It was upright, smooth, controlled. I zoomed in, heart hammering, and the force swallowed it like it had never been there. I stood there another minute, zoomed in on empty snow and realized my mouth was open. Then I went inside and locked every latch again. I didn't take my boots off again. I kept them on like the floor might suddenly not be mine. The mall sat by the fireplace, handle pointed toward me the way a dog points its nose at the door. I replayed the clip where the shape moved between the trees until my eyes felt raw. Frame by frame, thumb sliding, pausing, sliding again. All I got was a smear of dark against dark and one moment where the blur looked too straight to be an animal on 4 legs. That's when I noticed something else in the audio. Right before the movement, 2 seconds before, there was a faint sound that didn't come from outside. A soft, dry scrape, like something brushed wood from inside the cabin. I froze and looked up, slow. The cabin was still. Fire low. No drafts. No settling creaks. Just that thick quiet. I stood, phone in one hand, and walked the room like I was searching a stranger's house. Kitchen first. Cupboards under the sink, behind the curtain. Nothing but old cans and a mousetrap with no mouse. Bedroom. Empty closet, spare blankets, a faded poster of a mountain range. Bathroom, cold water, cracked mirror, nothing behind the shower curtain except mildew. Still, that scrape sat in my head like a splinter. I went back to the main room and looked at what I hadn't looked at when I arrived, the places people hide history because they don't want it found. Under the coffee table, there was a shallow drawer. It stuck on something when I pulled it, like it hadn't been opened in a long time. I yanked harder. The drawer came out with a gritty protest and a smell of paper and damp. Inside was a guest book. not the cute kind with "had a great stayo" and doodles. This one was a thick notebook with a warped cover, pages swollen at the edges. The first entries were normal: families, hunters, hikers, dates, little jokes about the road. Then the handwriting changed, the ink got darker, the lines got tighter. Heard moving on porch 1:40 a.m., probably bear, locked up. 2 pages later, different hand. Something walked around the cabin all night. Not an animal. Too slow. Too heavy. Another. Don't leave food outside. Don't leave trash. Don't leave the door open even for a second. I turned pages faster, heart beating louder with every line, because the words weren't dramatic. They were practical. The kind of notes you write when you're trying to survive something you can't explain. Then I hit an entry written in pencil, hard enough to gouge the page. It watches from the trees. It knows when you're looking. Stop shining lights at it. The date next to it was only 6 months old. My mouth went dry. I flipped back to the listing date in my head, the owner saying the place was quiet. I stared at that pencil entry until the letters stopped looking like writing and started looking like proof. Under the guest book were loose papers folded in half. A printed map of the area with a circle around the cabin and a line drawn to a spot marked with an X about half a mile up the slope. No label, just the X, heavy and angry, and taped to the inside cover of the guest book like someone wanted it seen, was a torn strip of paper with 3 words written in block letters: "Do not answer." I stared at it for so long I realized I was holding my breath. I walked to the front door and looked at the latch, at the hook above it, at the thin line of light under the frame. Answer what? Knocking? Calls? Anything. As if to remind me the mountain didn't care about my questions, the weather shifted. The light through the windows turned flat and gray, like someone put a sheet over the sun. I stepped onto the porch and felt the temperature drop hard enough to sting my cheeks. Snow started as a few lazy flakes, then thickened fast. Not the gentle kind. The heavy, urgent kind that swallows tracks and roads and makes you understand how easy it is to get stuck. I looked towards the truck. The tree line beyond it had darkened, and the falling snow made the woods look closer than they were, like the whole forest was leaning in. Back inside, I found another thing I hadn't noticed before: a small battery radio on a shelf by the window. Old plastic, cracked antenna, dust in the speaker grill. I clicked it on. Static. Then, faintly, a voice. Not a station. Not music. Just broken syllables, like someone was talking through a wall. I held the radio close, turning the dial slowly. The voice faded, returned, faded again. For a second, I caught one clear word, sharp as a whisper in the room: "Leave." Then it drowned in static. I stood there in the dim, radio in my hand, snow tapping the window like fingernails, and the guest book open on the table like it was waiting for me to add my own entry. The snow didn't stop. By late afternoon, it had turned the clearing into a white blur, and the tree line into a dark fence that kept getting closer as visibility shrank. My truck was still there, half dusted, but the road out was already disappearing under fresh layers. I kept the radio on low like it was company. Mostly, it was static, but every now and then it would spit out a fragment, syllables that sounded almost like speech, almost like a station, never long enough to trust. I set it on the table and tried to act normal. Ate a protein bar, drank water, fed the fire, but the guest book stayed open. That torn strip, "Do not answer," sat in my head like an instruction from someone who'd learned it the hard way. Around dusk, the cabin got darker fast. Not the normal sun went down dark, but the kind of dark that feels thick. The snow killed the last light, and the forest swallowed sound the way it swallowed distance. I turned on every lamp. The bulbs made weak yellow puddles on the floor. I checked the door 3 times. Deadbolt. Hook latch. I dragged the small table over and wedged it under the knob anyway. Not because it would stop anything, just because I needed to feel like I'd done something. Then I put the phone back on the table and hit record. The first hour was nothing: fire crackling, static from the radio, my own breathing. I sat with the maul across my knees like it was a ritual. Every now and then the cabin would pop as it cooled, and my whole body would tense and then hate itself for tensing. At 9:43, the porch creaked. One slow groan, like weight settling. Not a quick step, not a stumble, a deliberate press. The boards complained under it. I didn't move. My eyes flicked to the door, then to the thin line under it. No light from outside, just black. Another creak. Closer to the door this time. My mouth went dry so fast my tongue felt thick. I reached for the phone, kept recording, and turned the volume up on the radio, as if noise could make me safer. Outside, the creak stopped. Then came the breathing. Not mine, not the fire, a low, steady inhale through something big. It wasn't frantic, it wasn't angry, it was patient, like whatever was on my porch had decided it could stand there all night if it wanted to. The handle twitched, just a millimeter, a soft click of metal. Testing. My hands clenched on the maul. I stared at the door like if I stared hard enough, I'd see through it. The latch clicked again. Another test. A pause. Then 3 slow knocks. Not banging, not animal scratching. Knuckles on wood. Spaced like a person at a front door. I felt my stomach drop. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. I just listened. Silence. Then the knocks came again. Same rhythm, almost polite. 3 taps. Pause. 3 taps. The radio hissed, and through the static, something sounded like a voice for half a second, too warped to understand. But it made the hairs lift on my arms because it matched the timing of the knocks, like a response. I reached up and killed the radio. The cabin went even quieter, and in that quiet, the breathing outside sounded closer, as if it had leaned down to the door. That's when it spoke. Not clearly, not like a normal human voice. More like sound dragged through gravel and forced into shape. Hey! The word came from right outside the door. Soft. Familiar enough to make my brain try to name it. Hey! You in there? My heart slammed so hard it hurt. I didn't answer. I didn't even shift my weight. The voice tried again, a little higher this time, like it was adjusting. Hello? It's me. Me who? There was no one up here. There hadn't been anyone on the road. But my body reacted anyway, because hearing a voice at your door is a trigger older than logic. I stared at the guest book on the table. Do not answer. The voice kept going, slow, testing words like a tongue learning them. Open. The door. A pause. The breathing changed, deeper, as if it had filled its chest. Please. It didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like imitation, a shape of politeness with nothing human behind it. I gripped the maul so hard my fingers ached. My eyes burned. Every instinct screamed to shout back, to demand to know who it was, to prove I wasn't helpless. I didn't. Outside, the porch boards shifted again, heavy weight moving from one foot to the other, then a slow drag across the doorframe. Wood scratching, not frantic, just firm, like something was mapping the edge of the door with its nails. The fire popped loud. I flinched. The voice stopped. For a full minute, there was only the scratch of snow against the window and the low, patient breathing right at the threshold. Then the breathing moved away, step by step, each creak of the porch boards receding into the storm until the porch went silent again. I didn't relax. I didn't move towards the window. I sat there with the maul across my knees, staring at the door, because the worst part wasn't the knocking. The worst part was how calm it was. I didn't sleep. Not really. I sat with my back to the wall, watching the door until the fire sank to coals and the cabin turned knife cold. Every time the wind slapped snow against the siding, my body tightened, waiting for the next polite knock, the next borrowed voice. Near dawn, the storm thinned. A gray light bled through the window. The porch was empty. Snow had piled over the steps, smoothed clean. The prints were gone, erased like they'd never existed. That should have helped. It didn't. It felt like the mountain could wipe its own tracks whenever it wanted. I told myself, I'm leaving, road or no road. I grabbed the shovel and stepped outside, phone recording. The clearing looked almost normal, except for the silence. No birds, nothing small. Like the woods were holding their breath. I cut a narrow trench to the truck and climbed in. Turned the key. Click. No crank. Again. Click. My stomach sank. I got out and popped the hood, stared at the frosted battery terminals. No cables. No second car, just me, the storm, and a dead engine. A crunch sounded behind me. One step in powder. I snapped around, the tree line stood still, empty. But the silence felt closer now, pressed in, and I could smell that sour animal musk on the air again. I shut the hood and backed away from the truck, keeping my eyes on the trees until my boots hit the porch boards. That's when I saw the side of the cabin. Beneath the kitchen window, the snow was disturbed in a wide trough, like something had crouched there. The siding above it had fresh scrapes, long and parallel, deep enough to peel wood. And on the window glass, a fogged oval, like a face had been pressed close enough to breathe. I stared at that damp smear until my fingers went numb. Then I went inside and locked the door again, even though the lock suddenly felt like a joke. I pulled the curtain back an inch. Nothing. Trees. Falling flakes. A soft thump came from above. Not sliding ice. A weight landing on the roof, then settling. The tin groaned. Another thump, closer to the front. Then a slow scrape across metal, like something dragging itself along the roof line. I grabbed the maul. The handle felt slick in my palm. The scraping stopped, the front door handle twitched once, and the voice came again, quieter than last night, as if it had learned that loud didn't work. Open. One word. Gravel forced into shape. Footsteps moved along the porch, slow, deliberate, toward the window beside the door. The boards complained under each step. A shadow filled the thin strip of light at the curtain. Then it leaned into the glass. At first, all I saw was darkness, like a wall pressed close. Then the shape resolved. A shoulder wrapped in wet, matted hair, and an eye. The eye was steady, not animal wild, not blind rage. Focused, studying me the way I'd studied its tracks. The face around it was broad and heavy, skin dark beneath the fur, with a flat nose and a mouth that didn't quite look like a mouth until it moved. Frost clung to its hair. Its breath fogged the pain with each slow exhale. It raised a hand. Not a paw. A hand with thick fingers, nails dark and blunt. The fingertips pressed to the glass one by one, leaving smeared dots as if it was counting. Then the lips pulled back. A smile. Teeth too even, too human in shape. My stomach turned. I stepped back, maul lifted. The window creaked as the hand pushed, slow and controlled. The frame flexed inward, testing. My heel scraped the floor. The eye snapped to the sound. The smile vanished. The brow tightened. The hand flattened and shoved harder. The glass groaned like it was about to give. And then, from somewhere behind the cabin, deeper in the trees, came a sound that didn't belong to wind or animal. A long, vibrating note, low and distant, like the mountain humming through bone. The thing at my window froze. Its head turned toward the sound, listening. When it looked back at me, the calm was gone. There was something else in its face now. Not hunger, not curiosity. Urgency. Its gaze flicked past me, into the room, like it was checking what was behind me. It fogged the glass with a slow exhale, then lifted its hand away. The pressure vanished. The window eased back into place with a relieved creak. Footsteps moved off the porch, heavy and quick, and for the first time since I'd arrived, I understood the worst thing wasn't that it could get in. It was that something out there could make it leave. I stood there for a second with the maul raised, staring at the window like I'd imagined the whole thing. The cabin was too quiet to be real. Even the fire had settled into a low hiss, like it didn't want to draw attention. Then that low note came again. Not as loud as before, but closer. It wasn't a howl. It wasn't wind. It was a vibration, like something resonating through the trees, making the air feel thick. My teeth felt wrong in my mouth. I realized I was clenching my jaw so hard it hurt. Outside, snow drifted across the porch in lazy curtains. No movement. No footsteps. Nothing. But the smell was still there, wet animal and turned dirt like a stain you couldn't scrub out. I backed away from the window, slow, and moved to the center of the room where I could see both the front door and the side windows. My phone was still recording on the table. The radio sat dead beside it. I didn't turn it back on. Another sound hit the cabin. Not from the porch, behind me, on the back wall, near the kitchen. A dull impact that made the dishes in the cupboard rattle. Then a second one, harder, low to the ground, like a shoulder hitting wood. I spun toward the kitchen window. The curtain jumped slightly with each hit. Snow slid off the sill outside in small sheets. Something was there, pressed close to the wall, out of my line of sight. The third impact came fast, and the cabin shuddered like it had taken a punch. A thin line of dust fell from the ceiling beam and drifted down in the firelight. I moved toward the kitchen, maul up, trying not to step too loud. The smell flooded in through the cracks in the window frame. Wet fur. Dirty breath. Then I saw it. Not the full body. Just the edge of it through the gap in the curtain. Dark hair packed with snow, and an arm reaching up. Fingers spread against the siding like it was measuring where the nails were, where the weak spots might be. The arm flexed. Muscles shifted under fur like cables. It wasn't slamming randomly. It was working the wall. I backed away and my boot bumped the table. The scrape sounded huge in the quiet. Immediately the pounding stopped, a pause. Then footsteps moved along the outside wall toward the front door. Heavy, fast, not pacing now. Purposeful. The handle rattled once, hard. I didn't wait. I grabbed the chair by the table and shoved it under the knob. Then I dragged the small dresser from the bedroom doorway, the one with the warped drawer, and jammed it against the door too. Wood scraped against wood, loud and ugly. The door shook. Once. Twice. On the third hit, the whole frame flexed and the hook latch jumped in its bracket with a metallic snap. The deadbolt held, but I felt the impact in my ribs like it traveled through the air. My mind went stupid simple. If that door goes, I have nowhere to go. I scanned the room like a checklist. Windows, too many. Back door. There was a back door. I sprinted to the rear of the cabin and found it, half hidden behind a narrow hallway. A thin wooden door with a simple lock and a cheap chain. I hadn't even noticed it when I arrived. I checked it now and saw fresh scratches around the latch like someone had already tried it. The front door took another hit. Harder. A crack opened in the frame near the bottom hinge. Not wide, just enough to show pale wood under paint. I ran back to the fireplace and grabbed the metal poker. It felt light compared to the maul, but it was long. I set the poker down and yanked the cast iron pan from the shelf, mostly because I needed something else heavy, something else real. My hands didn't stop shaking. Outside, the pounding slowed. One hit. Pause. One hit. Like it was listening between strikes. That's when the voice came again, but it wasn't trying to sound friendly now. It was tight, pressed through teeth, like speech didn't fit its mouth when it was in a hurry. Open! I didn't answer. The door slammed inward with a full body hit that made the dresser jump. The chair skittered an inch across the floor. The hook latch bent slightly, metal groaning. I stepped back, maul up, and realized something else. It wasn't attacking like a predator trying to break into prey. It was acting like a person trying to get into a burning room. Like it needed in fast. The low vibrating note outside came again, closer than it had been before. This time it didn't feel like sound. It felt like pressure in the room, like my ears were filling with water. The cabin lights flickered once, just a dip, then steadied. The thing on the porch went still. No pounding, no voice, just that heavy breathing right on the other side of the door and the faint creak of boards as it shifted its weight. I held my breath without meaning to. Then it hit the door again, harder than before. The hook latch tore free with a sharp metallic scream. The top of the door lurched inward a fraction, held only by the deadbolt and the dresser jammed tight. Snow blew through the gap in a fine powder, sprinkling the floor. My stomach dropped. I grabbed the poker and shoved it through the opening. Not to stab, just to block, to buy a second. The metal scraped wood. Something outside exhaled hard, a frustrated blast that fogged the gap. The door flexed again. The deadbolt squealed in its housing. The dresser shifted, legs digging into the floorboards. I backed up 2 steps, then one more. Planting my feet like that would matter. The maul felt suddenly too heavy, too slow. I could already see what would happen if the door gave. One step in, one reach, and I'd be done. Outside, the breathing changed, faster now, almost agitated. Then, from somewhere beyond the porch, deeper in the trees, that low vibrating note rose again, longer this time, and the cabin seemed to lean into it, like the boards were listening too. The pressure in my ears spiked. My eyes watered. For a second, the fire's flames flattened and bent sideways as if the air had shifted. And in the middle of all that, the thing at my door made a sound I hadn't heard yet. Not a growl. A short, strained noise, almost like warning. The pounding stopped. The door didn't open, but the force holding against it eased, just slightly, like whatever was outside had turned its head and looked away. I stood there with my arms locked, staring at the gap, waiting for the next hit that didn't come. For a few seconds after the last hit on the door, there was nothing but that low pressure in the air and my heartbeat in my ears. Then the weight on the porch shifted. One creak, two, and moved away from the threshold like it had been pulled. I didn't wait to understand why. I grabbed my duffel, shoved my phone into my pocket still recording, and yanked the back door open. Snow had piled against it like someone meant to seal it shut. I kicked a path through, stumbled out, and cut around the cabin toward the truck. The clearing looked emptied. No birds, no wind, just falling snow and the dark fence of trees. I ripped the driver door open and turned the key. Click. Again. Nothing. I popped the hood with shaking hands. The battery terminals weren't just frosted. They were disturbed. Clean scrape on the metal, a thin black smear like dirty fingers. One cable sat at a slight angle. I grabbed it and felt it wobble. My stomach dropped. Something had been under here. I tried to force the cable tight, fingers numb, knife scraping ice, swearing under my breath. The engine stayed dead and silent. Then that low note came again, closer, and my ribs felt hollow like the air was vibrating through bone. I froze and looked up. At the edge of the clearing between two pines, a dark shape stood upright. The Yeti, bigger in daylight, shoulders like a doorframe, wet hair clumped with snow. It didn't charge, it just watched me at the truck like I was doing the wrong thing. I backed away from the hood, slow, keeping the truck between us. All I had was my pocket knife. The mall was inside. The Yeti took one step forward. The snow compressed under its foot with a dull crunch. I lifted my free hand, palm out. Don't, I said, voice thin. It didn't stop because of me. It stopped because it heard something. Its head snapped towards the uphill trees, the side that Map X pointed to. The muscles in its neck tightened. It drew in a deep breath and made that strange sound again, the one that didn't feel like anger. Warning. Then it moved, fast, cutting across the clearing in a straight line, vanishing into the tree line and reappearing a heartbeat later closer than it should have been. It circled back towards me with urgency, and I heard something else, faint but real, from behind the cabin, a soft, dragging sound, like something being pulled across snow in slow, careful strokes. The Yeti stopped between me and that sound and lifted its hand. Not a wave, a signal. Two fingers curled inward, then opened like back. My throat tightened. I couldn't make my body move. The dragging sound got closer, and the air changed, not colder, wrong. The wet animal stink thinned, replaced by something dry and old, like dust in a locked room. The Yeti's eyes flicked past me, and for the first time I saw fear in it. Controlled, but real. It stepped toward me, not to attack, but to block my line of sight, forcing me to look at the cabin. That was enough. I ran. Not toward the road, towards the only walls I had. I hit the porch, slammed inside, and threw the back door shut hard enough to rattle the window. I locked it. Chain, latch, everything. No pounding followed. No polite knocking, just the faintest creak out front, like something heavy had stepped back onto the porch. I dug my phone out and saw it still recording. Snow glare, my boots, the tree line, then the dark shape crossing the frame. Proof. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, because the one thought I couldn't outrun was simple. The truck didn't die on its own. I kept the back door chained and wedged a chair under it anyway. Then I went to the front and pushed the dresser tighter into the frame until the legs dug grooves into the floor. Every latch, every window. I moved like if I stopped moving, my mind would catch up. Outside, the porch creaked once. Not a slam, just a slow complaint of wood underweight. Then, nothing. No knocking. No voice. No testing of the handle. Just that wrong stillness, like the mountain had paused to listen. I set my phone on the table again, camera aimed at the door, and backed up until my shoulders hit the wall. The fire threw weak light. My breath came out too loud. I tried to hear the difference between wind and footsteps and failed, because the forest wasn't giving me anything to compare it to. A faint scrape came from the front porch, slow, dragging, like something being pulled across boards. Not the heavy, patient shifting I'd heard from the Yeti. This was lighter, smoother, almost careful. The pressure in the room returned, subtle at first, then building like my ears were filling with water. The flames in the fireplace leaned sideways again, not from a draft, but like the air itself had decided to move. And somewhere in that pressure, I heard the sound of snow falling off branches outside, soft cascades, except there was no wind to shake them loose. My phone's screen lit up. Not a notification, just the camera auto-adjusting in the dark. On the porch, the scrape stopped. Then I heard it at the side of the cabin, near the kitchen. 3 taps, spaced like a code. Not the polite knocking from before, more like nails clicking on wood. Testing. Listening. I tightened my grip on the maul and forced myself to move towards the kitchen window. I didn't pull the curtain wide, just an inch. The snow made everything hazy, but I could see shapes. A dark mass stood near the tree line, broad and upright, the Yeti. It wasn't looking at the cabin, it was looking uphill, toward the deeper woods, body angled like it was bracing for something. Its shoulders rose and fell with slow breaths that fogged in front of its face. Then, closer to the cabin, something moved across the snow. Not fast. Not with the crunch of steps, more like a shadow sliding, gliding through the white without breaking it the way a body should. I blinked hard, thinking it was my eyes, but the shape kept drifting, hugging the side of the cabin where I couldn't see it anymore. The Yeti's head snapped toward it. It made that strained warning sound again, short and tight, and took one step forward. The shape didn't rush. It didn't react the way an animal reacts. It just kept coming, quiet as a thought. I backed away from the window so fast my boot caught the rug. The sound seemed to snap the cabin's silence in half. Outside, the Yeti turned sharply toward my window, and for a second I could see its face clearly through the falling snow. The calm was gone. Its eyes were wide, locked on the cabin like it wanted something inside to understand. It lifted a hand and pressed its palm to the glass, fingers spread. Then it dragged two fingers downward, slow, leaving clean lines in the fog, a gesture that felt like a warning, a sign to get low. I stared at it, confused, breath stuttering. The Yeti's mouth moved, not words, just a shape, as if it was trying to remember how. Behind me, in the main room, something touched the front door. Not the handle, the wood itself. A soft, slow rub, like someone pressing their cheek to it. My skin went cold. I backed away from the kitchen window and dropped to a crouch behind the couch, keeping the maul up like it mattered. From that low angle, I could see the strip under the front door. The darkness there shifted, not a shadow cast by movement outside. A presence close enough to block the tiny gap of light that shouldn't exist at night anyway. The dresser in front of the door gave a tiny, almost delicate nudge. Not a slam, not an impact, just pressure, testing the weight, as if whatever was out there was learning how the barricade sat. The Yeti let out a low, rough exhale that sounded like frustration. Then it hit the porch, one heavy stomp that made the whole cabin vibrate, and the pressure in the air wobbled, like a note being interrupted. For a moment, the rubbing at the door stopped. I didn't breathe. The phone on the table kept recording, its little red dot steady, catching the door, the dresser, the firelight. And in that frozen second, I realized the worst part. The Yeti was outside, and it looked like it was guarding the cabin from something else. I stayed behind the couch until my legs went numb. The pressure in the air rose and fell in slow waves. The dresser at the door shifted once, barely an inch, then stopped. No slam, no brute force. Just that careful testing, like fingers learning the weight of wood. Outside, the Yeti stomped again. The porch groaned. The pressure wobbled like a note being interrupted, and for a few seconds everything went still. Then came a sound I can't dress up into something normal. A soft, wet inhale right against the door. Not through the crack. Through the wood like the cabin itself was thin. My throat tightened. I pressed my knuckles to my mouth to keep from making a noise. The inhale moved, sliding along the front wall, slow and searching, until it faded into the storm. The pressure followed it, thinning as if the room could finally exhale. On the porch, heavy steps shifted away. 1, 2, 3. Then silence. I didn't move for a long time after that. I kept waiting for the polite knock to return, for the gravel voice to try again, for the door to tremble under a full body hit. None of it happened. At some point, the black outside the windows turned to dark gray. The storm had eased. The cabin felt cold enough to crack teeth. When morning finally arrived, it came like a reluctant mercy. I stood up on legs that didn't feel like mine, picked up the maul and inched toward the front door. The dresser was still jammed tight, but the door frame looked worse now, splintered at the hinge line, a thin crack running downward like a vein. I moved the dresser back an inch at a time, listening for any change outside. Nothing. No breathing. No porch creak. I unlatched the deadbolt and pulled the door open. The porch was empty. Snow had settled in a smooth sheet across the boards, fresh and clean, except for one wide smear near the steps, like something massive had stood there long enough to melt it with body heat. And at the edge of that smear were deep prints. 5 toes. Broad heel. Same as before. Only now they were closer together, angled sharp, like it had pivoted fast. Farther out, leading toward the trees, the prints overlapped and churned. A scuffed patch where the snow looked beaten down, as if something had struggled, or braced, right at the tree line. And beside that churned patch, there was nothing. No other set of tracks, no drag marks, no paw prints. Just disturbed snow that ended in a clean, untouched surface like the second thing had never needed to step. My skin went tight. I walked to the truck, maul in one hand, phone in the other, recording the whole time. The hood was frosted shut, but when I yanked it open, the battery cable was loose, exactly like I'd felt before, cleanly pulled, not shaken by storm. I shoved it back down, tightened it with the little toolkit I had, hands shaking so hard I dropped the wrench twice. I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine coughed. Then it caught. That sound, an ordinary motor coming to life, hit me so hard I almost laughed. Almost. My eyes burned instead. I didn't pack neatly. I threw my bag in the back. I grabbed the guest book without thinking and shoved it into the duffel like it was evidence. I didn't even put them all away. I set it on the passenger floor like a seatbelt for my fear. As I pulled out of the clearing, the tires chewed through fresh snow and found the gravel beneath. The road was ugly but passable. I didn't look at the trees any longer than I had to. Every time I did, my brain tried to invent a shape in the trunks. Half a mile down, where the switchbacks opened to a view, I saw it. On the ridge above the cabin, a dark figure stood against the pale snow, still as a boulder. Too big to be a person, too upright to be a bear. The Yeti didn't move, it didn't chase. It just watched the truck snake down the mountain like it was counting the seconds until I was out of its problem. And for one sick moment, I thought, it isn't watching me leave. It's watching to make sure I actually go. I kept driving until the trees thinned and the air warmed a fraction, until I hit the first patch of weak signal and my phone buzzed with delayed nothing. No texts, no calls, just the reminder that the world existed again. An hour later, I found a gas station with fluorescent lights so bright they hurt my eyes. I parked under the canopy, sat there with both hands on the wheel, and realized I was shaking like I'd been left out in the cold for days. My phone was still recording, the red dot still there, proof sitting in my pocket like a live wire. I sat under the gas station canopy until my hands stopped shaking enough to hold the phone. The world around me was normal, pumps clicking, a kid laughing somewhere inside, a radio playing tinny pop through the door. That should have snapped me back. It didn't. In the truck, I scrolled to the beginning of the recording and watched the cabin swallow me again. Firelight, the barricade. My own face lit orange like I was telling myself a ghost story. At first, it was what I expected. The knocks, the handle tests, that gravel voice trying to sound human. My stomach still flipped hearing it say, "It's me," like it was reaching into my head for something familiar to wear. Then I noticed the timestamps. Before the first knock, before the voice, there's a stretch where I'm sitting dead still, staring at the door, and the camera adjusts its exposure for no reason, like the room got darker without the fire changing. I rewound, slower, frame by frame. Behind me, in the corner by the bedroom doorway, something shifts in the darkness, so subtle you'd miss it if you weren't looking for it. Not a bear shadow, not the curtain, a shape tall enough to touch the top of the door frame, too thin to be the Yeti, standing inside the cabin with me while I'm facing the door like an idiot. The air in the truck felt suddenly too warm. I leaned closer to the screen until my eyes hurt. The shape doesn't move like something walking. It glides a few inches, then stops. And when it stops, the audio changes. There's a faint, wet inhale that doesn't come from outside. It comes from the room. From behind me. I paused the video and just stared at my own frozen face on the screen, realizing the worst truth. I wasn't being hunted from the porch that first night. I was being studied from inside the cabin. I kept watching anyway, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. When the voice at the door says open, the camera catches a second layer of sound underneath it, almost a whisper, almost like someone practicing. And right as the voice changes the tone, the dark shape behind me shifts again, closer to where the phone is sitting, like it's leaning in to hear itself. Then comes the moment from part 9, the Yeti outside the kitchen window. I always thought it was looking at me. On the footage, it isn't. It's looking past me, into the cabin. Its eyes are locked on the darkness behind my shoulder. When it presses its palm to the glass and drags 2 fingers down, it's not telling me to get low because it's about to break in. It's telling me to stop being seen. And when it stomps the porch and the pressure wobbles, the shadow in the doorway flinches, actually flinches, like sound hurts it, like the Yeti is disrupting something I can't feel. I sat back in the driver's seat, mouth open, breathing shallow. Outside, a man walked past my truck with a coffee and didn't even glance at me. Normal life, inches away from the edge of something I'd dragged into it. I pulled the guest book out of my bag with shaking fingers and flipped through the pages until I found a line I'd skimmed the night before, written small in the margin like whoever wrote it was terrified of being caught even by paper. It doesn't live out there. It uses places. I didn't go home that day. I drove until I found a motel with bright lights and thin curtains. I set my chair against the door. I slept in bursts with the TV on low, not for comfort, just to keep the room from getting too quiet. At 3:08 a.m., there was a soft knock. Not on the TV, not in the hallway outside, on my motel door. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps. I sat up so fast my spine cracked. My phone was in my hand before I realized I'd reach for it. The knob didn't turn. No voice came through. Just the idea of someone polite on the other side, waiting. I stared at the door until dawn, and when I finally left, I didn't check out at the front desk. I just walked out like a thief. By the time I reached my apartment, my brain had built one rule and nailed it into place: do not answer. I tore a strip of paper from a grocery receipt, wrote the words in thick marker, and taped it to the inside of my door at eye level like a warning to myself. That night, I slept with the lights on. At 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed. No notification, no call. Just the screen turning on by itself, lighting the room for a second. And in that second, from the other side of my door, I heard my own voice, soft and familiar, like someone smiling through the wood. Hey, you in there? If this story made your stomach drop, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. If you heard your own voice outside your door at 2 a.m., would you answer? Or would you stay silent?